The story begins at the end of the 19th century. Here, we see a hunter named Martin who lives alone on a mountain peak in an abandoned village. No one lived near Martin's house. The area was mountainous and rocky, surrounded by dense forests. Martin's daily routine involved setting traps for hunting, taking care of his goats, and hunting wolves so that he could sell their skins to make money. He moved through life with a cold determination, his face hardened by years of solitude. Over time, Martin accumulates several wolf skins, so one day he sets out for a local town to sell them. The journey is long and fraught with challenges. He walks all day, battling exhaustion, and spends the night in a cave, haunted by the distant howls of wild creatures. The next day, he reaches town and enters a bar for a drink. There, the town's mayor, who had come to buy the wolf skins, attempts to bargain with him because Martin had raised the price. Martin's stern expression never wavers, and his deep, measured voice leaves no room for compromise. In the end, the mayor pays the higher price, leaving with the prized skins. The bar owner, noticing Martin's lonely demeanor, suggests he should consider getting married and starting a family. Martin chuckles dryly, dismissing the idea as he mutters, "The mountains are no place for a wife or children." Yet, as he departs, the suggestion lingers in his mind like an echo in the vast wilderness. Soon after leaving town, Martin meets a local widow named Pasquala, whose own needs and sorrows mirror his. Their connection is immediate, a collision of lonely hearts seeking solace. Some time later, back in his isolated cabin, Martin recalls the bar owner's words and is struck by a sudden realization of his deep loneliness. Not out of love but for the sake of companionship and convenience, he decides to marry Pasquala. Returning to town, Martin speaks to Pasquala's father and offers money in wolf skins as dowry. Burdened by worry for his daughter's future, her father agrees. Martin takes Pasquala home as his wife, but their union is marked by silence and tension. Adjusting to life in the harsh mountains proves difficult for Pasquala. Martin, a man of few words, treats her more as a tool for his needs than as a partner. Despite the emotional coldness, she endures the hard work, cooking, cleaning, and even assisting with the wolf skins, with a heavy heart and quiet sorrow. In time, Pasquala's health begins to fail. A persistent cough and a dwindling spark in her eyes foretell her decline. One evening, with trembling resolve, she confesses to Martin that she is pregnant. But instead of joy, Martin's face darkens. He knows the child is not his. A bitter mix of resentment and betrayal churns inside him, yet he buries his feelings by turning to his work, methodically carving a cradle from wood. Late one night, as a bitter wind howls outside, Pasquala softly asks, "How do you live alone in this harsh place? Don't you ever long to leave?" Martin gazes into the dancing flames, his voice low and haunted, "I like it here. When you have no choice, you learn to survive." Then, with a pause that speaks of a loneliness too deep to voice, he adds, "Now that you're here, I'm not alone anymore. Soon, we'll be three." His words carry both a promise and a warning of what is to come. Tragically, as Pasquala's pregnancy progresses, her frail health deteriorates. One bitterly cold night, she goes into labor, her cries piercing the silence of the mountains. Martin, helpless and devastated, clutches her trembling hands as she endures unbearable pain. When dawn arrives, both Pasquala and her child are lost to the unforgiving cold. Overcome by grief, Martin shatters the cradle he had lovingly built, and in a fit of raw anger, he desecrates the old graves in the local cemetery. In the midst of his sorrow, Martin wraps the bodies of Pasquala and her child in cloth and takes them to her father. His voice, icy and accusing, cuts through the silence. "You knew she was sick, you knew she was pregnant, and yet you sent her to me." With a bowed head, Pasquala's father admits that they feared society's scorn for a pregnant widow and had hoped that the child's birth would hide the truth. Martin's heart hardens further, his fists clench as he demands his money back. Though her father pleads for time, Martin departs with bitterness in his wake. A month later, driven by unresolved anger, Martin returns to reclaim what he believes is owed. Arriving with a rifle in hand, he terrifies Pasquale's father. In desperation, the old man offers his youngest daughter, Adela, in place of money. Martin scrutinizes Adela with cold calculation. Finding her healthy, he agrees, and the very next day, they are married. Adela's heart is heavy with dread. She is forced into a union with a man whose actions have haunted her family's past. Her father, filled with regret, apologizes for her unwanted fate and presses a red cloth containing potent herbs into her hands. "If you cannot bear this life," he whispers, "this will end your suffering." With no choice left, Adela departs with Martin. The journey home is long and silent. Adela, frail and fearful, clutches the small bundle of belongings as Martin intermittently offers water with a detached concern. That night, in the solitude of their new home, Martin claims Adela in a manner that is cold and mechanical. Adela's spirit, already crushed by sorrow and resentment, begins to shatter further as she is forced to endure endless chores and Martin's callous demands. One day, Martin informs Adela that he must leave for 4 days on business. His tone is devoid of warmth as he asks if she needs anything. With quiet resolve, Adela simply instructs him to visit her parents and tell them she is fine. Before departing, Martin warns her about the dangers of the wilderness, a caution that feels more like a threat than concern. That night, alone in the oppressive darkness, Adela trembles with terror. The following day, while wandering in a confused state, she stumbles upon 2 open graves in the nearby cemetery. These incomplete graves, once meant for Pasquale and her child, send a shiver of dread down her spine. In that moment, a harrowing certainty takes root in her heart. She believes Martin was responsible for Pasquale's death. When Martin returns, Adela confronts him about the graves. His answer is cold and evasive, "They're just holes." Yet his eyes reveal a hidden story. Then, he blames Pasquale's father, claiming it was his fault for sending her despite her illness. Shock and anger surge within Adela, and she calls him a liar, her voice shaking with fury and despair. In a desperate bid for control over her fate, Adela soon discovers that she is pregnant. While Martin, in a rare moment of concealed joy, begins preparing another cradle for the unborn child, Adela is consumed by a storm of rage, horror, and a deep-seated belief that her destiny is doomed to mirror Pasquale's tragic end. Unable to bear the burden of her circumstances any longer, Adela makes a drastic decision. Recalling the red cloth and the poisonous herbs given by her father, she resolves to poison Martin's food. Over several agonizing days, she subtly adds the toxic herbs to his meals. Gradually, the poison takes its toll. Martin begins to suffer from relentless nausea, vomiting, and a creeping weakness that slowly erodes his once sturdy frame. During one fateful hunting trip, seizing a moment of opportunity, Adela attempts to escape. Clutching her scant belongings, she flees down the rugged mountain paths. In her haste and despair, she accidentally becomes ensnared in one of Martin's animal traps. The cruel metal jaws snap around her leg, inflicting a deep and excruciating wound. Despite her desperate efforts, her injured leg fails her, and she collapses, losing consciousness amid the biting cold. When Martin returns home that evening and finds Adela missing, panic overtakes him. He spends a sleepless night scouring the dark, icy landscape. At dawn, following faint footprints left in the snow, he finally discovers her, unconscious near the trap, her body frail and chilled by the night's cold. With a mix of anguish and duty, Martin rushes Adela back home and tends to her injuries, his hands trembling as he carefully binds her wounded leg. In that silent moment of care, he discovers another devastating truth: Adela has suffered a miscarriage. The realization plunges him into a profound sorrow. For several long days, he cares for her wordlessly, burdened by the crushing weight of regret and loneliness. As Adela slowly recovers, the unspoken truth between them grows too heavy to ignore. One day, with her voice barely a whisper, Adela tells Martin that she can no longer bear this life. Sensing her resolve long before she speaks, Martin simply states, "The cold is coming, and the days will grow shorter. If you wish to leave, you are free. The next morning, Adela is gone. In leaving, she experiences a bittersweet liberation, while Martin, despite the brief comfort of her presence, is left engulfed in a familiar, suffocating solitude. In the aftermath of her departure, Martin finds a hidden box containing the poisonous herbs, evidence of what Adela had done. A crushing realization washes over him as he sits in silence, piecing together the betrayal. Overwhelmed by regret, sorrow, and an unbearable loneliness, his strength fades further. With no one left to care for his goats or to share his burdens, Martin retreats deeper into isolation. As winter's harsh grip tightens, Martin's weakened body finally succumbs to the relentless cold and lingering poison. Alone in his desolate home, he gazes up at the dark, empty sky, reflecting on a life spent in isolation, never having known how to truly love or be loved. In his final moments, he is swallowed by a sorrowful silence that echoes the bitter loneliness of his existence. The movie concludes with a poignant question: if you were in Adela's place, would you have stayed with Martin or chosen to flee? This lingering query invites us to reflect on the tragic consequences of a life devoid of compassion and genuine human connection. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments below.